Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So now we're going to discuss a very important topic for the future of Europe's economy, climate and environmental policies that have been considered to be at the heart of Europe's competitiveness problem. Not everybody was here, but in the previous session I already mentioned how if you look at the European Union's climate tax, the emissions trading system, this in itself is higher than the total American natural gas price. In Europe, natural gas prices are 5 times the level of the United States, because in the US fracking has been legal. They have not had the same amount of restrictions that we've seen in Europe for more traditional fossil fuel consumption. Europe has phased out its own fossil fuel production, but of course this has not stopped them from importing all kinds of fossil fuels from places like Qatar and obviously Russia, with the effects that we know. So that said, a very important topic to discuss. So I'd like to give the word to Rob.
Thank you. Thank you. Is this going to work? There we go. Okay. So yes, thank you to SFL Europe. I'd also like to mention before I start that a lot of the ideas in what I'm going to present today and what the panel will talk about owe a lot to the International Climate and Freedom Coalition meeting, which is a sort of a monthly ongoing climate free market discussion meeting. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, then come and find me or one of us, and we might be able to put you in touch. So what is free market? Oh, crap. Okay. That's way too far. There we go. What is free market climate policy? It's technology neutral, positive incentive policies to replace the negative incentive policies that contract freedom and put barriers on innovators and consumers. That is basically what the EU's climate policy is, which is all of these things on the screen and to spend 500 billion euros a year doing them. If we're being generous, some of them, like the ETS trading scheme, appear at first glance to have some sort of market basis. One of them makes use of the Coase theorem. Maybe the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, looks something like a Pigovian tax. They're not, but some people, I guess, haven't thought particularly hard about where the free market basis of climate change should be. The second presidency of Donald Trump has just arrived, and it's completely upended the Green New Deal. It's put a clear focus on the other goal, which was to provide an alternative to Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. In this new world order, a CBAM will lead to reciprocal tariffs. It's in fact, the ETS scheme and the EU subsidy program is also likely to lead to tariffs from the US and from any country that's following suit. The enormous cost, the 500 billion euros, is also now in competition with defense spending. That's 800 billion euros that Europe is collectively going to spend on our new obligation to defend ourselves. Thank you, Donald Trump. Also, this sort of international relations 101 argument as to why government should spend a lot on climate change was based on this idea that it gives us some sort of credibility, some sort of soft power. And unfortunately, or fortunately, there's no more Joe Biden, there's no more Angela Merkel, there's no more Justin Trudeau. The people that we would be pleasing by pursuing these policies are no longer in power. And actually, even the European Union itself is getting anxiety, and the European Commission is, to some extent, starting to pull back on some of the regulatory side of this. So we've got a policy here that's sort of anachronistic in this new Donald Trump world. It's unaffordable, and it isn't effective. Ineffective in what sense? Well, just to plug it a little bit, the IFT, my organisation, did a paper on this, and we found that it would cost about £650 per capita per year ad infinitum if the UK were to follow the US, the EU into the CBAM scheme. That's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And that doesn't include all of the downstream inefficient effects that happen allocatively when you start to make such a huge intervention in the market. What sort of ends up happening is these distortions build up. They have this dynamic effect on long-term growth, and also, more importantly, consumers just pay them because it's more expensive to comply than it is to just pay the CBAM tax. This is sort of borne out by the example of the RGGI in the northeastern United States, which had the brilliant effect of, I think it was 34% reduction in the amount of production happening in the states that were participating. And it had no impact whatsoever on the trend rate of decarbonisation, which is quite astonishing given the amount of damage that it was able to cause. So the outcome is that, quite simply, consumers just don't change their behaviour. Right? The CBAM doesn't do what people claim that it does. It actually just disincentivizes the production of carbon, which is a very different thing to incentivizing production with green technologies. We're now in this world, right, where the knee-jerk response of any government to a problem or a demand to do something about climate change is just to slap money on the table and spend it. I remember when I was at school, there was every child was shown the Al Gore documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, and so I have some modern, really inconvenient truths for our generation, which are that current climate policy does not take into account the single most important fact about climate policy, which is that the current technology we have is not good enough. Even if we spent the trillions that they want us to spend, we still could not solve this without innovation. And therefore, innovation is the key to any climate policy. Innovation is at the center of it all. And the best climate policy should therefore make investment as cheap as possible and remove all barriers to innovation. Luckily, we live in a world where markets try to produce less with more, right? That's the basis of productive efficiency. So markets and climate incentives are already aligned in one important sense. Freedom and democracy go together with decarbonization. There's actually a happy alliance between freedom and decarbonization and free markets and decarbonization that we, who are trying to develop this free market climate proposal, are taking advantage of to sort of supercharge these proposals. This brilliant cost curve, which is in terrible definition, I'm sorry, is from McKinsey, and it sort of shows you this. On this y-axis, you've got the cost of abatement, and across the bottom, that no one can see, is the abatement beyond business as usual. So basically what you've got at that x-intercept are all the technologies on the left have a negative cost of abatement. So these are things like fuel efficiency in cars, and all the technologies on the right have a positive cost of abatement. This means that on the left side of that x-intercept, you can cut costs and cut CO2 at the same time. So why aren't those things happening? It's because the government taxes all the people that want to do those things in order to subsidize the people that want to do this expensive stuff like carbon capture and all this kind of stuff, right? So free market climate policy is about undoing all of that, about removing the taxes, removing the barriers that are encouraging people inefficiently to go into these inefficient investments, and instead allow investors to choose for themselves where they can cut costs, where they can cut carbon, and replacing negative incentives with positive incentives. So these that you can see three of are the basic proposals: decarbonisation tax cuts, which are sort of the opposite of a carbon tax; the clean tax cuts on equity, which are tax cuts on equity; You can finance more if you can bring your profit level higher, which of course allows and incentivizes more investment to take place. But the kicker that I want to introduce, and that then we can discuss on the panel, is this idea of a rapid innovation fund, which is effectively a new way to raise money to finance property, plant and equipment investment that would it would be tax exempt in the same way that government debt is tax exempt. But the beauty of the proposal is that rather than just tapping into equity, it's a supply side tax cut on debt. And interestingly, although you have to admit that just by raising more money doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get spent on green investments. You can steer the investments with the targeted income and corporation taxes towards the kinds of investments that you want to see. But to some extent, there's no real need to do that, because whenever you're replacing old capital with new capital, it will be more efficient, it will produce more with less, it will therefore be green in some important sense. What really attracts me to this idea of rapid innovation funds is the idea that it's sort of a carrot for lots of poor nations around the world that really struggle to raise finance. If you can give them access to tax-free capital raised in New York or London or Hong Kong, in exchange for accepting the basic free market conditions, and for accepting some suite of tax reducing and tax removing and regulation removing proposals, getting rid of subsidies, etc., then that can be used as a carrot. You can have all this investment in your economy that you're desperate for, that you're starving for, if you liberalize your markets. And that's the basis of this sort of internationalization to replace the sort of the Paris Climate Accord model of let's just all agree to do something and then have no enforcement mechanism if we don't, which doesn't really work. The argument, if you happen to not believe in climate change or think that climate change is good, is just that this is so much cheaper than what we're doing at the moment. That the benefits of free market climate policy are that it improves growth by propagating free market economic policies, and therefore the difference between a CBAM and the Climate and Freedom Accord proposals, having been modelled by the Growth Commission, are about £1,000 per person per year, or about €1,200. So that's the pitch, the basic pitch for free market climate policy. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Then we'll now move to Jose. So Jose, please, what's the alternative to the current model of taxation, central planning, requirements, targets?
Hi, hello. Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me. I represent Instituto Juan de Mariana, which is a classical liberal or libertarian think tank based in Madrid. And since October 2023, we are members of the Climate and Freedom Accord. By the way, we will start being the co-host of the Climate and Freedom Accord meetings starting next May, so if you are interested, you can contact us. So, yes, the current policies does not work. I will talk some about it later, but you should know that economically free countries have a 64% better environmental performance by the Yale Environmental Performance Index, and increasing economic freedom by 1% reduces carbon emissions by 0.3%. So economic freedom clearly is the way. And yes, the current policies, taxes, subsidies, regulations, they just don't work. They are making us poorer, and they are not effective. And now I'm going to speak about the case of Spain, because we have published this report about the green bubble, Spain's renewable energies from 19 1998 to 2014. So in 1998, we set the goal of achieving a 20% renewable energy by 2020. And there were some steps in that year, 1998, but everything changed in 2007. Then we had this regulation that that set a premium above market up to 795%. So you can imagine the brutal effect of this regulation. So the structure of the subsidies was that the bigger the installation, the lower the subsidy. So companies created those installations. So installations below 100 kilowatts were the biggest premiums. Okay. So, for example, a company could build 10 installation of less than 100 kilowatts, owned by 10 different legal entities, but of course it all belonged to the same company. And it was just mad because they were all together, okay? They were one beside the other. So, yes, we were far beyond the 20% of our energy production over time, but the cost was just mad. In 2013, the cost was above 6 billion euros. So in 2014, the government had to change its policy, okay? On the one hand, they lowered the premiums to a more reasonable amount, and the immediate effect of that was that, 90% of the workforce was lost because there was not real market support for that. And our government initiated retroactive cuts to subsidies, which of course is illegal. It is against the Spanish Constitution. So, and there has been over 50 international lawsuits against the Spanish government. So, if for you to understand the cost of this regulation, I want to share with you some data. In 2007, the year where these premium subsidies started, electricity prices in Spain were below the European Union average. In 2013, it was among the most expensive. And we had a tariff deficit, meaning that the consumer didn't pay for the full amount of the cost. So you have the actual cost on the one side and the regulated price, lower regulated price on the other side. It created a deficit, and then it was a debt that Spanish consumers were accumulating against companies. This debt amounted to 40 billion euros. And the total cost for Spanish consumers were above 300 billion euros. So it was massive. Of course, this regulation undermined competitiveness of Spanish companies, and it had another effect. Spain was a leader, one of the main markets in green technology, and it ended just when this program started. Now other countries like France, China, etc., has surpassed Spain because, well, being innovative was not that important if you have just the subsidy to go for it. And of course, I think this is a clear example of how old politics does not work. I mean, when politicians decide on the functioning of the market, the result can be really bad. And what we are proposing from Instituto Juan de Mariana and other organizations is to rely on the incentives of the market. So I think that a more sensible policy would be to have tax breaks or tax-free financing mechanisms. So that's all for the moment.
Thank you very much, Jose. Then we now move to Lukasz, who's with the Warsaw Enterprise Institute. Now, I know the Polish government, from different persuasions, have always been, let's say, among the more critical policy participants on European Union climate policies. Maybe that's because of the history of Poland, that they're more aware of the downsides of this kind of central planning. So please, Lukasz.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to, first of all, thank you very much for a kind invitation to come here, to be here with you in Prague, Golden Prague as it was called. I remember when I was young, you can buy the beer called Zlata Praha, so I don't know, it's still possible to buy it here in Czech Republic, but I remember it was really good. Okay, so thank you very much for a question. We as a Warsaw Enterprise Institute, we are a think tank which is dealing with a freedom of economy. So we try to look on the economy as a source of development of a people and building our wealth. So that's the most important thing for a people of our country, whole region, whole Europe, and finally the whole world. We talked a lot about the protectionism and the freedom of trade and the Donald Trump policy. So we think that such a protectionism is against the wealth of the people of the world. So when we are talking about the building the wealth of our people, we can facing right now the unprecedented economic experiment in the European Union through ETS system, CBAM you mentioned, mechanism in general, the Green Deal as a whole, as a building the new model of climate economy based on central planning, artificial carbon prices, and resources redistribution. So we are here. We are gathered here during this panel and during the whole conference to try to find some alternative, some free pro-innovation approach to decarbonization. So Rob mentioned these ideas they had in Climate Accord. So later I will tell some words about the projects we are trying to start in Poland using the models you proposed in your accord. So I would like to start with that. Let's say that the climate crisis is a fact. Temperatures are rising, extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. Of course, we don't know fully what is the human impact on ongoing changes, nor we cannot fully estimate the impact of the changes to our lives. So still it's a matter of scientific research. But the fact is that the fossil fuels are running out, and the fact is that currently, for example, the level of smog in Poland, in Polish cities are among the highest in the world. So we need to do something. So we want to actively influence the environment, but we wish to have a, let's say, approach of effectiveness, not rather than ideological approach which we can face in European Union countries. Some examples. Right now in Poland, the cost of energy, electrical engineering is the highest in Europe. And what's interesting, 45% of cost of energy in Poland, it's different kind of taxes, 45%. Among them, 25%, these are the cost of the ETS system and the cost for the clients. Some examples from Germany. Just a few weeks ago, the clients in Germany, in Berlin, in Brandenburg, which are they are operated by energy giant Vattenfall. All the prices of electrical engineering, electricity was increased in 8% for regular customers. Of course, as an official reason given by Vattenfall was the rising cost under the EU ETS system. So they openly mentioned that because of the ETS system, we have to rise your cost of your electricity. So we can say that the mechanism which was supposed to motivate green transformation is increasingly just rising the ordinary people's bill. And it's not only the individual peoples, but also the companies which are using the electrical power to produce everything. Another example, according to data given by Focus magazine in Germany, that the coal reduction plan, which is introduced by Germany, could even worsen the climate balance in a short and medium term. Because of a lack of stable baseload energy, it first imports this electrical energy from the countries with dirtier energy mixes, like Poland or Czech Republic. What's paradox, let's say. And of course, add to this emission generated by building the new gas pipelines or transmission lines, because the gas right now is a clean, so maybe it could change in some future. But building the new pipelines, new equipment, it's consuming a lot of, it's increased the CO2 emissions. Of course, we can also add to this the offshoring of production to China, which also increase the global CO2 emissions. And these 2 or 3 examples are not very isolated. They are, let's say, the warning signals. A climate policy, if it's to be effective, must be based not on symbolic gestures or costly regulations, as we face right now, but on a real efficiency, innovation, and market incentives. You mentioned some incentives. I will tell later about that. And the 2 main tools proposed by European Union right now, it's ETS system and CBAM, which you mentioned. The CBAM is going to be active in 2026, as I remember, 1st January. ETS originally was supposed to be the market-based emission trading system. In reality, it has become the tool for central economic control, generating rising prices for energy, transport, heating, and so on. Now, right now, we have the idea of expanding this ETS system into ETS2 system, which could affect even more sectors and daily life of a whole society. It was mentioned that in Great Britain, the cost per capita could be more than £600 per capita. We have similar estimation in Europe that it could cost about 600 euros per capita. So it's very, very comparable. And what's even most funniest in this situation is not even how we collect this money, but how we spend this money. That's even interesting. In Poland, we are facing a really huge deficit in energy consumption. What does it mean? That means that thanks to the good condition of our economy, which is really good, the consumption of energy is rising. Definitely, the level is increasing. But the number available, let's say, CO2 emissions is decreasing because of the ETS regulation. What does it mean? That if we wish to spend more energy for our economy, to fuel our economy, the companies, the energy producers, should buy the new certificates. And of course, they do not have their own money, so they're passing all the costs into the consumers. Thanks to that, Our government is collecting each year about 6 billion euros only from ETS system. So it's last year it was 24 billion zloty, so it's 6 billion euros. Last year it was a little bit smaller because the cost dropped a little bit. But then how do they spend this money? The original idea was it should be spent for real decarbonization of the economy of the country and serve for the climate. But there is no obligation, any obligation to spend this money for these aims. Of course, according to European rules, you should spend about till 2024, the countries should spend about 50% of the earnings for decarbonization and fighting with climate changes. In 2024, they changed it, so right now the government should spend about 100%. But it's based on reports of the government. So they are reporting how do they spend. So there is no tools to check if a government is really spending that money for decarbonization. In general, in Poland, majority of these funds goes directly to the state budget. And our government is reporting to the European Union. For example, we support the Polish national railways. So that's a way how do they support the decarbonization, supporting the railways. But the most funny thing, it was the program called My Energy. Because of a deficit in the ETS system, the prices of energy increased, huge increase, we had huge increase. So the government decided to create the program called My Energy, that means the subsidies for the people for this increase of energy. So right now, because of the increase of the prices, the regular people, they will receive special subsidies. It's not the solution. So that's the future. We talk about the CBAM. It's another solution, and of course, it was supposed to protect the EU industry. In practice, it's a new form of protectionism, harming developing economies from one side, disrupting trade and increasing the cost of the raw materials. So from one side, we are harming the developing economies. Somehow, maybe we should support like economies from Africa or from Asia. But from another point, the cost will go on the regular customers. As usual, as a protectionist, are harming the regular customers. So thank you
Thank you very much. Before we move to the Q&A, I'd like to ask a few questions to the panelists. So Rob, you mentioned this special fund and special tax treatment for certain investment. Sort of, how do you avoid the trap that this will distort investment decisions? How do you avoid that bureaucrats are ultimately then picking winners and losers again?
I mean, the way that you avoid it is that you don't target it to specific technologies at all. It's investment sort of agnostic. It's technology neutral. It applies actually just as much to non-green things as it does to green things. That's the way that you avoid that, and that's the way that the proposal is designed. It comes up against the criticism of, okay, all you're doing is just raising a lot of money for investment, which under any circumstance should be considered a good thing. But the criticism is that it's not targeted towards specifically green things. And the response should be that any new capital is going to be greener than the old capital. But secondly, that you've got a secondary suite of policies, these tax rates, which do sculpt it or bias some of that new capital that you're raising towards things that achieve decarbonisation. Obviously, this is a deviation from pure free markets, right? No one's going to deny that. But you can make it as as least likely as possible to go the direction that we've just heard about here, by making them as simple as possible in terms of success and qualification, right? I think so. If you're talking about I don't know, energy markets, it would be units of energy generated divided by amount of CO2 produced, and that's the metric that if you do very well on, then you can get a decarbonisation tax cut. Some scheme designed very clearly with a clear goal that doesn't choose between technologies at all, right? That would be how.
Right, thank you. Yeah, Lukasz.
If I may add one thing, I talk about the project we are working on. So I mentioned it based on your idea. We called it Research and Awareness Campaign for the Economic Impacts of EU ETS. And the initial idea of a project is, from one hand, to calculate the real burdens of ETS system and the prices and the real burdens which the system imposes on the key sectors like energy, automotive, aviation, maritime. Using the data it's possible to collect from open sources and analyze how the prices are changing, and then try to compare the ETS results with these two solutions you mentioned. In our research, we would like to think on this rapid innovation funds, which is really interesting solution. How with a creating the investment funds in order to incentive people to innovate, to do innovation. And another solution could be decarbonization tax cuts, which also somehow the incentives, because we think that economy is too complex process, dynamic system, that this needs requires incentives, not penalties. And we think that the basic lesson of economics that based on penalties are less effective and more costly. So that's why we wish to recalculate the cost of ETS system and the possible and model cost of these two solutions. And then our aim is to try somehow influential the politicians and societies in Europe, using some collaborating with us think tanks from whole Europe. We thought about some publication made in 15 languages in Europe. So let's a little bit appeal right now. If there are some donors on here, we would be happy to collaborate with you in this project. Thank you.
Right, thank you. And Jose, after Spain had this massive bubble in solar energy, and yeah, went bust, and you mentioned 90% of the project basically disappeared, right? So now we're more than 10 years later. Yeah, like how are things going with the Spanish energy sector, the role of the state? If I'm not mistaken, I understood that the Spanish government is considering to shut down the nuclear plants, or there were some noises, which I would think is kind of crazy if you're looking for a energy source that is both very efficient and carbon neutral.
Yes, well, you are right. You are well informed. The Spanish,
is that the plan?
The plan of the Spanish government is to close our nuclear centrals. It's strange because we have this minister. She was against nuclear energy, and she proposed to close each and every one of our installations. And then she became a member of the commission, and suddenly she was for nuclear energy. It just, yeah. It's amazing because she changed, overnight, her position. Nowadays, like 18% or something like that of our energy is produced by nuclear energy installations. but the idea is to close them, all of them. It is against the trend worldwide because, as you know, we have a problem with CO2 emissions.
So I can just ask, are they going to impose a legal ban on these nuclear plants, or yeah?
Yes, a legal ban. Yeah, of course. So they will have to close, and it is very costly because once you close a nuclear facility, it is very difficult to start again. It's very difficult because, especially if you allow the time to pass, because experts, well, they just disappear. I mean, you have to create new experts. It's difficult for you to do that. Fortunately, this is not the case in the rest of the world. There are many countries where are having more and more nuclear energy.
All right, thank you very much. We have 5 more minutes for a Q&A with the public, so anybody who wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. Yes.
Why European Union doesn't use nuclear power? Why it's afraid of what?
Well, I am not a representative of the European Union, but I think that the idea has changed. Of course, back in the days, there was this idea of nuclear energy as a menace. We had this 3 Mile Island thing, then Chernobyl, of course, and the case of Japan. But nowadays the technology has changed so much. It is so much different from what it was before that most of Europeans think that nuclear is a good idea, and even most of European governments are changing their minds.
So I think that the nuclear energy is not the issue of European policy in general. So it depends on the country. So we have a country like France, which generally based on nuclear power. So it's mainly, I think in many countries, a heritage of German Greens Party, which they fought with all kinds of nuclear power, nuclear weapons in the 80s. And so it's more, I think, ideologically motivated. And of course, in Germany, the main factor for closing all the nuclear power plants were the Fukushima disaster, which is completely non-comparable to German situation. So it was definitely more ideologically motivated than with real effectiveness. And frankly speaking, it's the most clean source of energy human ever invented.
Yeah. Current research shows that nuclear power is the cleanest.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, here in the front, and then we can.
So my question will be to the Poland representative. Poland is one of the most fast developing countries in the European Union, but you still use a lot of coal to produce energy. As far as you know, the coal energy is the most dirty energy, and I think you have all resources to switch to renewable resources, or let's say to develop another strategies to produce energy. Why don't you do that? What are the reasons? Because you influence the health of your citizens, as you said, a lot of smoke in Poland. So why you put the economic development on the first stage and then think about the health of the people? So generally, yes.
I can answer this question. That's fully true. That Polish energy mix based on coal. That's true. That was historical reason for that. And of course, it's impossible to switch into the natural or renewable energy from day to day. So it's a long-term process. It's changed. Currently, our government wish to open the nuclear power plant. So they are working on that for many years. I hope finally we will have that. But again, we have the coal. It's our natural, let's say, jewel of Poland. So it's very hard to close it from day to day. It takes time. So that's the reason. But the mix is changing from years to years. So it's better and better, I can say.
Right, well, I think we'll have to leave it here because time is up, but please join me in giving a round of applause to the panel.